So I will be reading from Isaiah chapter 60, beginning at verse 1. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people, but the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around you and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your son shall come from afar, and your daughter shall be nursed at your side. Then you shall see and become radiant, and your heart shall swell with joy, because of the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. The multitude of the crowd shall cover your land. The dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and incense, and they shall proclaim the praises of the Lord. Our epistle lesson this morning is from the book of Ephesians. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. The mystery revealed. For this reason, I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ for you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God which was given to me for you, how that by revelation he made known to me the mystery, as I have briefly written already, by which when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ, which in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, as it has been now revealed by the Spirit to the holy apostles and prophets, that the Gentiles should be fellow heirs of the same body, and partakers of his promise in Christ through the gospel, of which I became a minister according to the gift of the grace of God given to me by the effective working of his power. To me, who am less than the least of all the saints, this grace was given, that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to make all see what is the fellowship of the mystery, from which the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ, to the intent that now the manifold wisdom of God might be made known by the church to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places, according to the eternal purpose which he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord, in whom we have boldness and access with confidence through faith in him. And today's gospel comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, beginning at the first verse. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And so they said to him, Well, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it was written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. When they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young Christ child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed from their country another way. Numbers chapter 24, verse 17 says that there shall a star come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. And so it is this morning that we think on the Epiphany and its role in the story. Now, in the English language, when we speak about the men who visited from the east, we usually use three different names. We refer to them as the wise men, the kings, or the magi. And they were more likely not kings, but they were men who worked, we would guess, in royal service to some type of government or administration. What we know is that they paid attention to astronomy, or even we could say, though we make quite a distinction these days, but in those days, of course, there was not such a separation between astronomy and astrology, of looking at the stars and trying to find important messages from them. So the name Magi comes from the similar word magic, that there's sort of the sense that they were dealing in, esoteric types of things. They were people who looked at the paranormal. And we figured that they were called kings also because of Psalm 72, verse 11. May all kings bow down to him and all nations serve him. Now the Magi are traditionally ascribed with three names, not written in the Bible anywhere, but they are given the names Caspar, Melchior, and Belteshazzar. In artwork, these travelers are sometimes portrayed as being one older fellow, one middle-aged man, and one younger man. And sometimes Gaspar is pictured as being either from Arabia or even darker yet, coming from Africa, maybe Ethiopia. Now, after returning home by an alternate route, as the scriptures tell us in the book of Matthew, the scriptures do not say anything more about what happened to the Magi. And because of the little that we know about them, we have to rely on just kind of what has been passed down to us through tradition. Now, a story has come throughout history that St. Helena, who was the mother of the Emperor Constantine, had come upon the bones of the Magi, and first she brought them to the Hagia Sophia, which is the big cathedral in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. And from there, they went to Milan, Italy, and finally, they have been for the last 700-800 years, something like that, in Cologne, Germany, where they still lie in a box. And of course, nobody's allowed to open the box and see the bones, but there is a picture of these bones. And scientists have determined from this picture that the bones look like, I don't know how in the world they tell, but they can tell that one of them is of a young man, one of them is middle-aged, and one of them is old. So kind of interesting to think about anyway. So we do not know much about the origin of the Magi. And we don't know how many came to visit either. The scriptures only reference that they were the three gifts. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But it doesn't say we three kings. That just kind of comes from our song of singing it, that there were actually three of them. It doesn't mention anything. You look in Matthew chapter 2. It mentions no number. It could have been 5, could have been 10. We just know that there were three gifts. People have attributed a spiritual meaning, an interpretation to the gifts. And I think they're pretty right on in their interpretation of it. For gold, being a precious metal, and nothing of value can top it. Giving the best gift. And so they gave the best to Jesus Christ. Also the gold being like a king's crown. They had come to worship one who was important, who was a ruler. The incense being like the incense burned in a cathedral or in a church, or a temple. As the scriptures say also, let my prayer rise before thee as incense, the lifting up of my hands as an offering unto you. The Psalms talk about that. So the incense is like showing worship, showing devotion to the child. And the myrrh being the burial fragrance, being Jesus' early death, dying at 33 years of age. Now the gifts that the wise men delivered were certainly costly. And we have no idea how they obtained such offerings, or as in old-fashioned terms, in some of the hymns they'll talk about their oblations, which is just sort of a fancy word of saying religious sacrifices to make. We don't know how they had such access. Were they sent by the royal ambassadors right away with these gifts, or did they purchase them along the way? We have no idea. But simply for the fact that they brought such expensive gifts show that they came from some source of wealth, and they value the one to whom they gave the gifts. We tend to focus on the sacrifice or the thought of the gifts anyway, as being the center of what the Magi did. But we never think about the journey. We don't think about that very much. We have to think how much it would have been to undertake such travel. We don't know where they came from. It is thought that they came from either Babylon or present-day Iraq, or maybe Persia, present-day Iran. There's some things here we don't have time to go into today why it's thought that they came from there. But it's been supposed that they maybe even came from as far east as China. But we know that they came from some distance and that they obviously risked something in making such a travel, as travel in those days was indeed dangerous, with the threat of thieves or running out of supplies, whatever. There were always dangers. But they arrived in Jerusalem safely, although danger still awaited them. And the scriptures tell us that they went home that different way then, because they knew of Herod's reputation. And Herod did have quite a reputation. Well, we don't know much about the Magi. We know a lot about Herod from secular history. And this man is up there in the ranks of like Stalin and Hitler. He didn't have the power to commit murder on such a mass scale as they did, but we know about the slaughter of the innocents, that because of his jealousy of this newborn king being born. He also took out his wife and his sons. Yes, they were trying to overthrow him, but still, I can hardly imagine sending a death sentence to your own family. This is the kind of man, they figure he had some type of, that was because of his organs not functioning very well, and everybody was afraid of him, and he was not a pleasant person, they say, to be around. So the Magi encountered trouble. But at the same time, we have to imagine that just as there were some fears, and the fears that they had in encountering Herod, that there must have been something really exciting about it too. I mean, think of it. To go travel thousands of miles probably to see this newborn king. I mean, there must have been something really thrilling about it. Imagine their curiosity. What kind of conversation did they share as they were getting closer and closer, and as they saw the star, and as the star stopped over the place where Jesus was? Here they had expended all this time, all this energy. We don't know how long their travel was. It could have been as long as a year. Was it going to be worth something? Or was this going to be all invested for nothing, some type of boondoggle? Now, none of us can imagine what thrill. I mean, maybe you've been on some pretty exciting trips on your own around the world, but this would be up there in thinking of what is at the end of the journey. And so because there's so much excitement and because there was so much to be seen, the church has called this season the Epiphany season. For the Epiphany means to manifest, to make known, to discover something new. And we use that word in our English language. Oh, what an epiphany, what a new realization. I came to something. So the wise men were heavily invested. But they were not as invested, even though they were invested, but they were not nearly as invested as Jesus was. Now, as a boy, you could say he was just, as a baby, he was just experiencing this as it was coming along. But think of how Jesus grew, how his Epiphany is a season of seeing of who he was. And in the traditional readings of the Epiphany season, the readings continue after the wise men. They come to the baptism of Christ in the Jordan, showing his sonship to the Father, of him turning water into wine, as the book of John tells us, and of many healings that he performed. And finally, this with his transfiguration, when he dazzled brighter than the sun. And so Jesus was one who was fully invested, because not only was he this infant king, but he came to show the world that he is the King of Kings, and that he was so invested that he went down to the grave and came back on the third day so that we could be with him. Now the Magi had a little piece of this. They understood just a portion of how important Jesus was, because they knew that they studied the stars and they knew that there was something really important with this. And it says that they paid Jesus homage, that they worshiped him, they bowed down and presented gifts. They knew a little bit. But we don't have any reason to think that the Magi knew anything more about Jesus' life after that. They didn't live in an age of newspapers and TV and radio and the internet. So they might have not known anything more about him other than he was just this infant king. They had no in-depth theological knowledge of the time, of what was going on. Yes, they brought him presents. Now, it's pretty interesting just as a side note here, that historians speculate that the Magi were from Persia, because in the native religion of Persia before Islam came, was a religion called Zoroastrianism. And this religion still exists, although it's small in number now and kind of in decline. But in Zoroastrianism, there was this prophecy of a Messiah-type figure who would come, not in the Jewish sense, but like a leader who would come and bring great light and great wisdom to humanity. And the Zoroastrian religion is sort of like Judaism, being unique in that it's one of the other few religions that has belief in only one God. All the other religions of the time believed in many gods. But Zoroastrian, there's a little bit of a connection there. And so it's thought that, because they were thinking a little bit more along these lines, maybe they were thinking that Jesus was the fulfillment of this prophecy. And that's something to think about, isn't it? That Jesus Christ is so grand and so big that he's the Lord of all the nations, that even something like, in another religion could be somehow pointing to him. That's how great our God is. But they only knew a little bit. Whether they knew of this figure in Zoroastrianism or not, they only knew a portion. But how rich are we? How wise are we that we know more of the story? That we don't know just the birth narrative. That we know that Jesus did all these things. That he performed miracles. That he taught with such wisdom that confounded his teachers. How blessed are we when you really think of it, that we see much more. The wise men knew a little bit. Like I said, they were following their vocation. They were, astronomers. They studied the stars. They also were known to interpret dreams. And it talks about that in the book of Daniel, that, when the Jews were in captivity in Babylon, that they, Daniel had these dream interpretations. And so it seems to make sense that in that part of the world, there were people who focused on this type of thing. So they had some gifts, but they knew nothing of the fullness of who Jesus Christ is. They presented gifts, but that's all they could do. What about us? Because we know so much more. What about you? Should we not give costly gifts to Christ too? Because we know the greater story, and what a blessing that he is for our lives. That we would give him not just gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. We don't carry those kinds of things around. That's not how we usually show our love and devotion to others. But we do have a way that we present our Lord with gifts, and we already did that this morning when we passed around the plate in our tithes and our offerings and in our stewardship. That we would give of our best to him. That we would give to the one who has done such great things for us. And so this time of year is also a stewardship time of the year. Just as we are turning we've turned in the calendar now to January and planning for the year, the annual meeting coming up, setting the budget, all those things. We think about the finances too. And we think about how Christ is at the center of all we do. Everything that we do is ultimately based on who he is. That's how people get so nervous when they hear verses like, when Jesus says, sell everything you have, give it to the poor. And people think, I can't give everything. I got bills to pay. I've got my kids to provide for, and I've got house payment to make and all these things. But we remember that Jesus was teaching us that when he wants us to give everything, he always talked about just giving a portion. But what he meant by giving us all is that everything that we do, all our thoughts and our talents and our time, everything goes to him. Part of it's only monetary, but part of it's your abilities and your talents and how you volunteer your time to help your neighbor or to do something in the congregation, to take up an office in the church. You can use your talents, and not even things that you necessarily think of as being at the top of the list, but very important for the work of the church. Like even today in having our fellowship dinner, we need people who can bake and cook. And we need people in the church who can use their carpentry skills to keep our building up to code. And we need people who can work with finances and balancing checkbooks and looking at statements. And we need musicians. And we need custodians. We need all these things. These are the ways that we give to the Christ child. We don't come up here and bring myrrh and frankincense. But we give of our time, and what a blessing it is. What an opportunity it is as we're starting to think about planning for the new year, that we can rejoice in it being a get to. We think so many times of our stewardship as, okay, this percentage and this is what I have to give. But no, it's an opportunity to use our whole entire lives and to use the talents that God has entrusted with us to give to the Christ child. So our faith walk is not just the money. It's not just the finances. Because there will be times, like the Magi, in your walk, your journey. We're not traveling thousands of miles like they did. But we have a Christian walk too. We use that kind of language because that's what faith is like. And it can be unsettling at times with that diagnosis that you have, or with the difficulty you have in paying those bills, or in getting along with family and friends, or whatever. Being a Christian may not be physically dangerous. Like we're not worried about the police coming and shutting down our service today anyway. But being a Christian and a Christian walk, it will show your true colors. It will be an epiphany for you too. It will be uncovering as you walk along in faith and you see how God has been walking alongside you each and every way. That you know that He's been with you, but you experience it and you feel it and you sense it in a new way when troubles are at your door. And so like the Magi, take heart that God has given us His Son. Not just some type of vague dream like they had that they were warned to go home a different way. But He has shown us the way, because He is the way, the truth, and the life. That He has made the way clear. As the Scriptures say, Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Or as we were singing this morning, that the light, that God has given us a Christmas star too, in the sense that He's given us His holy word so that we know the way to Him. So His word will guide us, just like the star pointed to the Magi. The greatest discovery, the greatest thing. And while we don't have the thrill of seeing the Christ child be born in Bethlehem like they did, but we have His word. We know the whole story. And so we can give thanks and praise to God that we can rejoice in knowing this great and wonderful Son of God who walks alongside us each and every day.